Alright guys, so I actually noticed that I didn't do a support type tier list at the very beginning of the year when I was updating like the Saber one, the Archer one, the Extra Class one, all of those. I like to update those tier lists at least yearly, or maybe at a point where like another really strong OP servant comes out. I like to at least update it and show where they stand. And so I'm going to go ahead and do this following up on the video I did yesterday, especially in light of someone like Caskill and Nightingale also getting very strong buffs recently over on the JP version of the game. Now, I'm not going to do a whole long intro here because we have a lot to talk about when it comes to the servants and my reasonings for why I think they're going to be sitting at the spots that they're at. But let's just remember that ultimately, as much as I might meme and joke about how this is going to be like objectively fact and everything, it is still going to be my opinion at the end of the day. So let's keep it a little civil in the comments down below. You could say that you think Tamamo is an S tier. I might disagree with you, but as long as, you give me your reasoning and we're both being civil about it, I don't see why we can't have differing opinions as long as we both have reasonings for our own opinions, right? And they're not just like, I like Tamamo, so she's number one, which I now know that everybody's going to drop that in the comments down below. They're going to be like, yeah, good points, man, but actually Zhufu sweep because Zhufu is my favorite servant. But with all that being said, let's just start diving right into this. So starting off with S tier, there are only 5 servants that land into S tier, and that is because these are the 5 servants that once you acquire them, they literally change how good your account is. Like the value of your account actually skyrockets because they can nearly carry your account, or actually they probably will just carry your account on their own. These are the people like both of the Scotties. This is like Koyenskaya over here, Castoria, your main card supports, and recently, I guess, well, semi-recently, Oberon has also been added to this list as well. The reason that these guys are all on here, despite me making the video yesterday saying that the Scotties are a little bit harder to use in comparison to, say, Koyenskaya or Castoria, is that they're still really good. Like, you cannot underestimate the amount of damage these guys can do and the ability to have quick servants loop underneath them, right? They are still very, very strong, especially with Ruler Scotty coming out on that looping part. She definitely made that a lot easier, and I think people undermine how good the servant actually is because she was kind of just Scotty too, and didn't seem to change a whole lot, but they kind of changed her kit just a little bit that really helped out quick setup. She's like a very subtle buff that goes unnoticed. Now, Oberon might be a little confusing for some people as to why he's this high, because people know that he does a lot of damage, but why is he here on his own? Because this is just on its own merits, not being paired with someone like Koyenskaya. Well, Oberon still does offer you 70% NP. He does give you an NP damage buff that he will then supercharge with his 3rd skill and effectively allow you to obliterate any last node in a farming node that might be really big, or if you're on the last HP bar of a boss, they're effectively gone. If you see a boss with 3 break bars, they only got 2 because Oberon is going to make quick work of that last one. He's still very, very strong. By himself, he does still kind of require you to think a little bit harder because his 2nd skill will drain a little bit of your NP back. Like, he'll give you the 50% battery and then he'll take a little bit, so you will have to kind of dance around that if you're just using double Oberon, but it is still very, very, very powerful, and he does deserve to be up here because he will change how good your account is. I almost view him in a way as like an updated waiver, if that makes sense, where you can kind of use him in any general team comp. I know he offers Buster, but his kit is just kind of generic enough with the 70% NP, the good Buster buff, and then making anybody be able to do really good damage based on NP damage that you could almost use him as a generic support in a way, if that makes sense. Like, you can almost use him as updated waivers. So yeah, I don't think I need to really talk about these guys too much because we all know that these are like the really, really big OP servants in the game. But I'm sure now there's a lot of questions because people are going to be like, well, if they're an S tier, who are all in A tier? Well, there are only 4 servants in A tier in my opinion. And let's also remember that if we're like talking about grades and everything, an A is still good. I don't want anybody to be like, what, they're only an A tier? They're not the most nutty, broken people in the game. It's like, don't worry, an A is still good. You're not going to be mad if you get an A on your test. But these should be fairly obvious. It's going to be both of the Merlins over here, and then it's going to be Reigns and Waver. Now, these are all just either because they're complementary in these two to their own metas, but they're not quite the main support you want to be using, or they're just still generically good. So starting off with like Waver and Lady Avalon, these two, like, they're not enough to carry their own metas by themselves, I would say, although you can use Lady Avalon in lieu of a Castoria, and you should still be able to farm. Sometimes it might be a little bit dicey missing out on the extra NP and missing out on the extra NP gain, especially because if you're using a Lady Avalon instead of another Castoria, you can't just start from 0% because she offers 50, but she only offers 20, right? So it does make things a little bit more awkward, but you can still kind of get it done, which is why I say they're more of supports for their metas as opposed to being direct replacements, but they're still very, very strong. These two, although just because they offer the 50% battery pretty much to one of your persons, and then they also offer a little bit extra to the other party members, is why they're so high, right? I get that Waver's kit isn't exactly, and it sounds so weird to say this, but he is a year 1 servant. Doesn't feel like it's quite as good as some of these other guys, because it's just like attack, defense, crit buff, and then the 50, and then his NP, it's like, yeah, it's a drain plus maybe a stun if you can get it, and then it also like will do like curse damage and defense down, but it's surprisingly still good enough to get you across the finish line, especially if you're in more like difficult content, or if you're farming and you just need that little bit of extra NP because your box is not as strong. I think Waver, actually, the title I would give him is like the king of like newbie accounts or something, or like before you get one of the S tier guys, he's kind of like the king of the account because he just kind of does everything. Doesn't do anything particularly great, like better than these other guys, but jack of all trades, master of none type of thing, right? Where he's not going to offer you as much defense as Castoria, but you're getting defense. You're not going to do as much damage as Koyenskaya, Oberon, or Scotty over here, but you'll still do some decent damage, right? All that good stuff. And so I think that's why he still deserves to be sitting in A tier, because that 50% is still really good. Reigns might be a little bit confusing for some people, because I notice a lot of people don't use her. I imagine they see like, oh, Waver, attack buff, way more useful for like farming, so I'm never using Reigns. But Reigns, in my opinion, just functions way better when it comes to more difficult content, especially if you need that class like nullification, which does come in handy a lot. As someone who likes to use my Zerker Jalter, you know, over here, I love the idea that she's able to kind of take the disadvantage of her getting smacked for 1 billion damage and make that neutral, and then basically take no damage with the defense she gives her, the invulns and everything, and it just works really, really well, you know? I think Reigns is actually very, very strong. People don't give her enough of the time of day, but she still does offer the 50%, which is the main reason Waver is here, and it's also kind of why Reigns is able to piggyback over here. I will say that the reason I think Lady Avalon wasn't made more broken to be like more in line with, say, like Castoria or something, because she does a lot of like really good stuff. Like you can start off turn 1 and get like a 100% Lady Avalon NP. Kind of crazy some of the stuff you could do with her, but I think they held back a little bit because they wanted to just effectively make her Arts Merlin, and Arts Merlin is still really, really good. I mean, they're still an A tier, but it's not quite that like nutty, broken, like anniversary style unit that we've been getting over here, which is why, by the way, I have this saying pre-JP anniversary if you want to make your own tier list, because we have no idea what we're going to be getting for anniversary. We're either going to be getting like Olga, who could be like a crazy DPS servant, or maybe we get like Solomon, Goetia, and they're just like the best Omni support in the game. Who knows what's going to happen when that comes out? But I think they just held back a little bit on that one when it came to her, because they wanted her to just be Arts Merlin. But again, Arts Merlin's still very, very good. Sorry about that little cut, because I noticed there was a little bit of a mistake between my tier list and the script that I had, where these guys were actually supposed to be in an A+, specifically made for them, because they, I think, are a bit better than these A tier guys, and they're kind of in between being the S tier people and the A tier people. So sorry about that little bit of a cut, because I just noticed that I was like, whoa, wait, hold on. They're supposed to be an A+, not A. I had a whole thing about that, but whatever. We're going to move out into the real A tier servants, right? So kicking off our A tier, we have Zhufu. Zhufu is functionally baby Castoria in what she's able to do for the party. She's like a free-to-play version of just a really good generic art support type servant that does something really interesting in being able to like drop 30 stars for the party, which does actually make her very interesting if you want to use her instead of a Castoria. Not quite as good as replacing a Castoria with a Lady Avalon, but still quite good. It gives you access to a crit build of like an arts team, which is really, really fun because Castoria doesn't natively offer that. Sure, you could offer like a 20-30 to your Castoria and then have the ability to have constant stars flowing in and everything, but the 20-30 is not an ability that Castoria just automatically has, right? That's not something that the servant has built into them. So Zhufu offering like a crit build to a lot of your arts teams is very good. It also is very nice, and this is not going to give her free points because I don't think Zhufu needs free points, but it is very nice or convenient that she is a low star servant that is on basically every single banner aside from like what specific class banners. So she's really easy to get, and she's very, very good if you don't have your own Castoria or your own Lady Avalon. She can easily kind of fill that void of a good art servant that you would need in your party. Another guy who can do that is Caskill. Now, Again, this is the reason I am really happy that I did not do this video at the beginning of the year with some of the other servants, because Caskill would be a little bit lower. He'd probably be in like the lower ends of B tier. Well, I say lower ends, but these are not ordered in order, because obviously I don't think Scotty's better than everybody here, but he would probably be a bit lower. But now they gave him basically a 50% battery, because he can charge his own NP by 30%, and then he can charge the parties by 20%. So now he's kind of fitting in line with some of the more modern supports that give the NP to everybody, on top of him making them all a bunch of crit servants, giving a strong attack buff, an arts buff, and because he has a 50% battery, he now has easier access to his own NP, which functions as a star bomb because it has very high hits, and it's an AoE NP. The only real issue with that is that if you're not fighting numerous opponents, you don't really get that star bomb aspect of his NP, because you're only fighting one guy, so you're not generating as much stars. But thankfully his NP does have other good effects on it, giving crit damage and defense to the entire party. So yeah, Caskill is just one of those guys that I'm not really like too upset with. Like, I think he's a very solid, like, lower rarity arts support servant that, especially if you want to play with like crit stars and everything, he's going to be your guy. I'm very happy with what they did with Caskill over here. Now the other two guys that are going to be in A tier, I think these ones are going to be a little interesting to talk about. That's going to be Miss Crane, and that's going to be Tamamo. So put down the pitchforks, because I've been, shilling for these servants for like the last couple of months, because I absolutely love using them. I think they are very, very fun to use because they offer different styles of gameplay, especially Miss Crane. But Miss Crane, again, we're in A tier, right? And A is still a passing grade. It's still a very good servant, but she could be a little awkward to use when it comes to, trying to have her shift around and everything, and it's not very forgiving. Like, if you don't put your guys in the right slot, like you don't put the person you want to bump forward in the correct slot in your back line, you could absolutely mess everything up and your run could just be completely dead, right? Even with like the nice buffs that Miss Crane is offering. And speaking of the buffs, I think a lot of the power that she offers does come from the NP. While I do think that some of her normal skill 1, skill 2, skill 3 are very good, I think most of that power is coming from the NP, especially for the fact that, like, yeah, she can come in, charge her NP by 100%, and then, immediately fire her NP and leave. You do have to have some stars available for that, and if you're like the unfortunate guy that just does not have like a star bombing CE, which we do, I would say, frequently get as like a free-to-play CE, stuff along those lines. But if you are like unfortunate to not have that, she can definitely feel a lot worse, because then you might feel like you have to bring costume servants who aren't as good, and then your whole team comp's not quite as good. So there's a lot of like wonkiness, or I guess like nuances to using Miss Crane that I think hold her back, as opposed to like Castoria press 3 skills and it's for free, and then anytime there's the NP, I mean, sure, you could use it for defense, or you could use it for big bungus attack and just absolutely smack whoever you're fighting, right? Or, Koyenskaya, where it's like basically press all 3 skills. Look at that, now your NP is, refunding and everything, although you do got to save the, the skill cooldown one. You can't just press all of them, but functionally, it's like not all that difficult to use either. Like, they're very forgiving in the way that you can just be like, click buttons, let's move. They're very easy to use, and because they're very easy to use and they have very OP buffs, it just makes them like some of the best guys in the game. Where Miss Crane, you got to use your head a little bit. I mean, that's why the meme is like big brain usage of Miss Crane. Tamamo, on the other hand, I think has a lot of stuff going for her that is very, very strong. The reduction of enemy NP, offering NP damage that, neither of the higher end art supports are actually offering, so that's a different buff types for your art setup. She still offers the very strong arts buff. She can kind of take care of herself with the defensive skill, even offers a heal on her 3rd skill, which is very strong, and is most famous for her NP that gives you NP, skill reduction, and then it also gives you more HP as well, which is very, very good. All very strong things. I think the only thing Tamamo is lacking to kind of kick her up with some of the more modern, or like the sub-modern supports, whatever you really want to call them. I don't know if we're getting that fancy with our labels for the supports, but I think all she really needs, and what I would like to see her get, is like a party-wide like 20 to 30% battery, I don't care which one, on her 2nd skill. I know a lot of people want it to be a targetable thing on skill 3, and it's like, oh, 30% to somebody on skill 3, that'd be so insane. And while that would be good, I think getting the 20% for the whole party would also help Tamamo get to her own NP, because sometimes in an art setup, you can have like a lot of conflict on focusing on what you want to get to, especially with Castoria, right? Sometimes you might want to focus more on getting to Castoria's NP because it's got the debuff cleanse, it's got the big attack, it's got the solemn defense, right? It's got like all of these really strong things that are competing with Tamamo's NP. Like, they're both very, very strong. And so sometimes you might go out of your way, like, I'm going to do this arch chain, I'm going to go for Castoria's arts card instead of Tamamo. So offering that would just be a little nice for offering extra leeway and helping Tamamo also get to her own NP. I mean, if they just want to be nuts, they could give her some rapid casting skill. I don't know if that's in the lore. I'm kind of forgetting right now. I'm drawing a blank on all my Extella stuff, but they could give her some variation of that, I assume, and give her like a self 50% battery and then like 20% to the other two party members. That way she doesn't have like a 70% or something that's too crazy. But I think something like that would also be really nice, especially because she would be reducing skill cooldown, so it'd be kind of faster to get back to those big batteries and she could more consistently fire her NP. Just a neat idea that I kind of thought of and something that I think she could get. But yeah, I do think they're very, very good. I think they're very fun to use. There's been a reason that I have been, you know, kind of pushing them a little bit and saying like, no, if you have Tamamo, she's still really good. Again, A ranked, right? Like, you know, you get an A in a test, you're going to be very happy, right? It's not a bad thing. Same thing for Miss Crane, but just not quite sitting up there with the upper echelon of some of the other dudes. Now, we're going to move into B tier. Now, B tier are either like a little too general that they're not like outshining some of the other servants, or they're just not as generally good as like say Waver or Reigns, who are also pretty generically good, or Miss Crane, who's not really locked down to any one card type. That, or they have like a niche that is really good, but it is still a niche at the end of the day. So starting off, we're going to look at Helena. Really, the only thing I have against Helena is that her NP doesn't really do anything for the party, like when she fires it, because cast skill is very similar, where like you can use him as like a kind of, I guess, a DPS if you really wanted to. Helena's got a bit better of an angle on that because of her NP damage buff thing she can do. She could actually do some really good damage, but they kind of have the same thing. But at the very least, cast skill is still offering things to the party, some really nice buffs to the party, whereas Helena's not really offering anything on NP. I think all they really got to do is offer some type of buff, like even if she just bombs like 30 stars or something, just something along those lines, just something even utility wise, that would make her a lot better. I think it would just knock her up into A tier immediately. I think we're just waiting on something like that, because 20% of the entire party, the Omni card buff, they're all just like really nice things. I just would like to see a little bit more pushed onto Helena, and then she's going to be good. Then we would go ahead and do Hans. Hans is just like the king of being like, you know, the most beginner-friendly, easy support to use, and just crack him out as soon as you start leveling up your account. Because, I mean, he gives you attack, defense, HP regen, star regen, and some crit damage. Like, and then he can also just get to his NP rather easily with the big battery. Like, he is just like one of the most like generically good supports in the game. Again, that's why he's in B. I mean, even to this day, if you're starting off your account, what is one of the servants people tell you to level up? It's like Arash, Shen Gong, and then like Hans is probably up there as well for your lower rarity guys. Like, he's one of the first people you mentioned, because, you know, what you could functionally do after the anniversary is you could scoop up your Waver, you could scoop up a Hans from the friend point gacha, and then instead of trying to level up your own DPSs and get them to like 10, 10, 10, you could just use both of those guys and bring like a friend DPS servant and use that instead. And instead of trying to bring supports, you could just try to buff your friend servant and have them absolutely just carry you through the game, right? And so you can just easily do stuff like that. The only real, like, I guess downside of Hans is that his buffs, like, you know, you got like chance-based stuffs in there. I guess you can maybe view that as somewhat of a downside. He's got low HP because he's, you know, a low rarity servant, so he could die kind of quick, I suppose. And then, I mean, the obvious one is that he just doesn't offer like as big or like as impactful buffs as like a lot of the other stronger guys. But like, that's not to say that he's bad. Like, he's still very solid. Again, B tier, not bad. Like, that's still good. You got a B on a spelling test, man, I'm chilling. You know, I got a B, I'm fine with that. Okay, next, I'm going to bring up Paracelsus, and we're going to bring up Asclepius. These two functionally just have the same role as looping support type servants, because Paracelsus gives you a big NP gain buff, and then he gives you an arts buff. So he's already really good if you want to use him with like quick servants, which I had to do because I didn't have my own Scotty after year 3, because I got absolutely crushed on those banners. And he did definitely help get the job done, especially because he can be a wave clear. If the enemies are weak enough, or they're like assassins or berserkers, he can clear them and make your life a lot easier. If you do also need that if your account's not as strong. And then Asclepius is like the inverse of that, right? Instead of giving the arts and the NP gain, he gives the NP gain plus the battery, which can be nice and more generic, I suppose, because you can use that with anybody. Like, you're not wasting the arts buff, because, you know, if you're using a quick setup, that was the one sad thing, is that I'm like, well, I have this arts buff, but it doesn't matter for my NP4 Lancelot over here because he's a quick dude. Like, it just doesn't matter for him. Asclepius also does have the ability to be like a healer guy, which is, he's really good at that, but most people are using him as a looper support until they get somebody better. And they're both very good on that. These are what I mean by like niche guys. Like you're pretty much going to use them as looping support, but they're very good at that job. But you know, if you're trying to do buster things, they don't really do a whole lot for you. I mean, it'll give you a guts in case the farming goes really bad and you get obliterated by like the 100 million enemy at the very end, I suppose. I don't know. Then we have Chen Gong. Chen Gong's kind of down here as well. So Chen Gong's very interesting because he's really limiting in that you really want to use him with Berserkers. But with Berserkers, he's basically baby Merlin, but that alone is just not enough to get him into B tier. What gets him up there is that he can cycle through buffers for you, right? Or he could just cycle through servants. He is the inverse of Miss Crane, and that is really, really good. Because what you could do is you could set up whatever Berserker you're using in slot 3. You know, let's say it's just Jolter Berserker, because, you know, we're Jolter Berserkers around here. Or Morgan, because we're also Morgan Simps. I said we're Jolter Berserkers. We're Jolter Berserker Simps around here, okay? I just left off the Simps part at the very end, but we're Simps for these girls, right? And so we're bringing one of them. We want to use our Berserker over here. We put Chen Gong in slot 2, and then we can just cycle through guys in slot 1 until we just, you know, absolutely eviscerate the enemy. We could cycle through supports, other pseudo DPSs. We could put taunts on them because we don't care if they actually take damage because they're getting cycled out anyway. And then whenever we run out of guys and, you know, our Morgan or our Jolter might be targeted, we pop our Waver-like defensive skill and we keep them safe, right? And then we just cook the enemy by that point. So very interesting. I really like a lot what Chen Gong is doing. It's just he's a little limiting in that you can only use him with Berserkers, which I kind of see why they did that. They didn't want him to be like too generic, because being too generic is actually why I'm actually bumping a probably surprise for a lot of people. Like, people would probably expect me to put this servant in like C or D tier, but I'm actually going to put Nightingale over here because she is actually kind of like almost a genericer version of Chen Gong over here as far as being like a buster support goes, because that buff to her third skill, I mean, it was already really good being a 50% buster mana burst for 3 turns, but now it also gives crit support. That's really, really nice. Let's also not discount the fact that our NP is still very good. It will just allow you to face tank NPs because you just neuter their NP damage and you neuter their attack. And her first skill is still very good. It just gives you a smorgasbord of good healing effects that are still relevant to this day when it comes to more hardcore bosses. I know the insta-kill thing might not be as good, but it is really, like, when it comes up, it does come up. Like, when you have it, you really appreciate that she has it. The only thing that I think Nightingale is really lacking is the ability to make her second skill targetable, because can you imagine if you just were able to give, like, strong humanoid special damage mods and defensive skills to anybody? She could become an insane plug suit type servant, because humanoids are basically every servant in the game. There's like a couple that don't fall in there, but it's functionally all of them. That would make her an insane plug suit like character, and kind of like a baby version of Oberon over here, because, you know, you plug suit in Oberon to do a lot of damage, but he also gives NP. So I don't know, maybe they also just say, screw it, here's a 30% targetable battery on top of everything that she's already doing on skill 2. I think that would help her out a lot. But Nightingale is one of those servants that the more I thought about it, because I deliberated over this for like a couple hours before making this video, but I think what sold me on it is like, well, Chen Gong I think does a really good job of like cycling buffers and is really good at keeping your buster guys around. And even though it's really specific, it's not a bad niche for him to be in. I was like, well, she's a bit more generic. She could definitely come up here into like tier B, especially after her buff to her third skill. So yeah, I definitely think she deserves to be up here. Welcome aboard, Nightingale. You're, you know, rising through the ranks slowly. Hopefully they buff your second skill into something good. Now, moving on to C tier, there is one lonely guy in here, and that is going to be Thomas Edison. Now, Thomas Edison, I think the only thing this guy is missing is a 50% battery, and he is actually, ironically enough, the only support that I pulled up over here on the side, because I was like, man, this is going to be one of those guys that people just don't know what he does. But he gives you like skill cooldown, he overcharges, his second skill is crazy, like it's offering you stars, NP gauge, party NP damage, and when you get to his own NP, this is not bad. Like, this is real nice for the entire party. You're like messing up the enemy's skills and NP for a turn, which also the ceiling of NP can function as survivability, and you're also keeping people alive by lowering the enemy's attack. I know not by much, but it may cause you to like live one of those hits. I honestly think the only thing he needs is like a Caskill style buff where maybe he gives himself 30% and then gives the party 20%, because then he can more effectively get to his NP faster, because, you know, it's kind of like the Scotty syndrome, that even though this could be survivability, if you can't get to their NP fast enough, because you're not probably going to be focusing too much on buffing up your support's NP, you're going to be focusing on buffing your DPS, you might still die anyway. So I think he's getting that C, which is still not a failing grade, because I like the effort that they're putting in with this guy. I think it's very interesting, and I think he just needs a little bit more, and then he'll at least be considered for some actual team comps, instead of more being a niche servant over here, with like the skill cooldown and the overcharge of 2 stages, which is still really cool, but, you know, not really seeing used. And then finally, we have the guys from basically year 1. Like, these are like the OG guys. Have to put them on here. They got to get their respect because, you know, my guy Shakespeare was definitely the clutch in year 1 at 20% NP, and that Buster buff did go a little crazy. I believe he can also stun on his NP if you ever did get to it, but it's like, whoa, that does go a little crazy, but it's just not nearly enough nowadays. And Amadeus over here does, or I guess did, have a really good niche of being able to come in, bomb 50 stars, give you an arts buff, and if he had Poster Girl, he could peace out, right? Like, he would basically be a free taunt for a couple of turns, which was nice. But unfortunately nowadays, while it is still like really cool, it's just not enough. It's almost like not even worth throwing him into the party anymore over, because fights are getting longer and harder. Ayo, pause. But they are getting more difficult, and just having like one turn of like, yeah, here's 50 stars, you get to do like guaranteed crits this turn, it might not even be enough, especially if your card RNG is not really good. You're like, oh, nice, I was doing a Buster setup and I got like all of my quick cards. Like, I got nothing that I needed. I'm like, well, that was kind of a dud. I either reset or I just waste my AP for this run. But yeah, I think these are like, they're just nostalgic picks for me, that like, yeah, the niches that they have are just not very good anymore. They don't really do a whole lot. I think if you do want to try to use them, it's either like nostalgia or mad copium, if you're gonna ask me, to be honest, because I just don't think it's quite as good anymore with how fights are structured nowadays. And I mean, they're definitely not good for farming. They definitely are not going to help you out with that either. So they don't really do a whole lot, but you can use them if you want to really be funny. But yeah, this is overall what I'm looking at. I'm sorry that, by the way, I forgot when I went into this that I forgot the A+ thing. That was a whole point that I just didn't even get to get into. But it's just functionally that I think they're in the middle of not quite being S tier, but they're definitely better than some of the A tier guys. But you know, let's keep it civil in the comments down below. I'd love to see some of you guys' tier list as well. I have a Discord, which is going to be linked down in the description down below. If you want to be like, hey, ZTL, here's my tier list. And I'll be like, cool, man. I'll try to keep it civil as well. If someone's like, hey, ZTL, you big dummy, I actually think that Tamamo's an S tier. I'll be like, look, I'm going to have to hard disagree. But if you give me your reasonings or whatever, you know, I'll at least hear you out in the comments down below. But I'm excited to see what this spawns this time, because tier lists either go really good or really bad for me. They're either all-out war, because we all just disagree on everything, or it's we're all like, well, you know, we're having a nice kumbaya moment where we're all just agreeing with each other. But yeah, with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace, late, guys.